All right, it appears that, that we've got a quorum, and we are ready to start the meeting. So I would like to acquire a motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting.
Motion to approve the minutes from last meeting. I'll second it.
Okay, motion approved. Next on task, we've got some unfinished business. I was just informed that some of the items that we have on there, I know Clay wanted to be part of, so we're going to, as shown, push that off to the next meeting.
Yeah, I believe we have two structural issues that we're looking at, and then that stair issue. And I think we should just, wait for that, so he's here also. So Jeff has to make sure he's at that meeting also. I think he brought up to revisit that.
Yep.
It's I look back at that issue, the old code section said 50 feet, and the new code is revised to 40 feet. It has a little more detail in there. It does not really define the 40, so we're going to use the floor level. So the actual building could be higher than, it could be 50 anyway. But I asked around, and the inspectors say that most people are constructing stairs as they go. So the code just says within one floor of the 40. So if you had a 4-story building, you'd have to have constructed at least one in the building to the third with a finish. It's temporary or finished. It doesn't really say. So it seems like it's what's going on right now on the field.
I think there was also, was there something about STCs through wall too that we tabled? Does that sound familiar? That we were going to bring back? No, yeah.
I brought that back at, I don't know if it was the last meeting. It was my suggestion at, if not the last, the one before, to keep the amendment.
Okay.
We don't really do inspections for sound unless you guys think we should. We say we keep the amendment, eliminate the STC requirements.
Okay. Okay.
Doug thought that everybody was complying now, but I looked back at the gypsum manual, and the wood ones are below 50. The steel ones do comply because they're full of insulation. So as long as we have wood buildings, the floor ceilings usually do comply, but not the walls. So
Okay.
I say we take it out.
Moving on, we have new business, which I believe Chris is going to. Oh, okay. We're going to get a presentation on the review of the International Residential Code and International Energy Conservation Code.
Good morning. Hap Hildebrand with Fargo Inspections. What we're going to do this morning is, since Chapter 11 of the IRC, which is the energy section, and Chapter 4 of the IECC are pretty much word for word twin brothers, my portion of the program is we're going to walk through both books at the same time. So when you're looking at my handout here, just to start out here, Table R11, RAN 1102.12, and then in parentheses you've got 402.12. So you can follow along based on Chapter 11, or you can have Chapter 4 of the IACC, and we will be working on exactly the same thing. So the amendments that we have here that are existing pertain to both codes. Okay? Ready? Okay. On page 480, Table N1102.1.2, this is insulation and fenestration requirements in a home based on component. And we have an existing amendment that we would recommend continuing. And under the wood framed walls, and this is just the small portion of the chart that we're talking about. So in zones 6, 7, and 8, which is our region and the rest of North Dakota, we would be looking at using an R21 insulation in the walls, or you can have an R13 plus the R5 sheathing. And that replaces an R20 plus 5. The code right now would, if we don't do this amendment, would require, you're saying basically R20, R21 in a 2x6 wall, plus an additional 1 inch of rigid foam on the outside of your framing to achieve that R value, which then increases from the standpoint if you're on the building side and the homeowner side, you're looking at extended jam sizes and some specialty doors and a lot of that kind of stuff. And then on the basement side, basement R value, we would be looking at doing an R10 rigid foam, which some of the builders are using, and or an R13 bat inside on a furring wall. Those are, again, 2 existing amendments. Also on that same chart down below, the fenestration U factors, fenestration requirements on the, basically on glass, has been reduced a little bit in all of the zones. So with your U values, as they go down, is an increase, where an R value, as it goes up, is better. The U value dropping, going the opposite direction, is also an increase. Okay, also on page 480, table N1102.1.4, this is the equivalent U factors based on the chart up above, table up above. So the, again, under framed walls and basement walls, the U factors have been adjusted and amended just to match up with the R factors used in the table above it. Both existing amendments. Other items that have changed in the code, section 1102.2.5, that's mass walls. And mass walls are solid block, poured concrete, those types of things. And they had allowed wood framed wall with brick veneer, and people were calling that a mass wall with that brick veneer, which, if you were looking at the chart, the mass wall allows a little bit lower R value. So the mass wall has now removed and specifically says brick veneer is not considered part of that. I don't assume that's going to have much of any effect around here, but it's something they did. Section 1102.4, air leakage. They have put in, when we have an existing amendment here, which allows the dwelling units out of an R2 from R2 occupancies or multiple single-family dwellings can also be permitted to comply with the International Energy, the commercial section of the Energy Code, section 402.5, which gives a little more room to maneuver in that area. Section 1102.4.1.3, this is an existing amendment. So it adds this section, and what it does is it allows for a visual inspection. And we're already doing an energy inspection, and with this visual inspection, which had been in the code previously but was removed, allows us to go out and check the sealing of the vapor barrier and stuff like that, and it eliminates the requirement to do a blower door test. So this is the reason for this amendment, which we've had over a couple of code cycles. Okay. 1103.3.2, this was sealing. There were some exceptions in that, under that section, that have been deleted now in the 18 code book. So we had an amendment that pertained to one of those exceptions in regards to sealing of snap lock pipe and some of that. But now those exceptions are just totally out of the code, and our amendment is no longer needed. Okay. Okay. N1103.3.2, duct testing. You have a lot of duct testing, and what they've done here, they've added this exception so that if you have a duct air leakage test is not required for ducts serving heat or energy recovery ventilators that are not piped in and connected to the actual mechanical system. So a lot of people are putting that air exchanger in, and that fresh air is being dumped in the return, so it gets distributed. And that ducting is required to be tested. If you put this air exchange unit in, and it's just going from here to there, and it's not tying in, has nothing to do with your heating or cooling system of your house, you do not have to test those specific ducts for that piece of equipment. That is just a new change. Okay, N1103.3.5, building cavities. This is an existing amendment that we have that we would like to continue, which we have reworded, and it says building cavities cannot be used as supply ducts or as a plenum. So what this allows is continues to be able to use this stud spacing over here to have the air return down here at the bottom and let it travel through that one specific stud cavity, be ventilated out. Without this amendment, the code is going to have every mechanical guy out there hard piping this all the way from the air return grill up here in the ceiling down through here and all the way back to the beginning. Again, an existing amendment, we'd like to continue with it. Section N1103.3.6, this is ducts buried within ceiling insulation. This is a new section in the code, and all of your heating and venting and stuff like that that's used in an attic already has a requirement of an R8, I believe, on it, on the duct itself. And now what they've done in addition, that doesn't change, that is still there, but now they've given you some limitations, since when you run that stuff up there through the attic, you blow in your R38 or your R40, whatever you're doing, they've gotten real specific and said, gee, you can put it all the way down on the bottom and you don't have to put quite as much on it over the top, but if it's 2 inches off the sheetrock, then you need to have maybe 3 inches of insulation under here. Be sure you do that. It won't affect anything, it just gave these guys a couple of options. It doesn't reduce the duct insulation itself, just kind of a little more leeway as to when they blew it, where it landed, and whether they got to go back in there and mess with it. Section N1103.6, mechanical ventilation. Staff recommends we want to continue the existing amendment. I see now that we have a typo in here that I did not catch. We are not deleting the word ventilation from that section. Our amendment deletes the word mechanical. Sorry, Gretchen, I didn't read that fast enough this morning. And what that's doing is just allowing people to ventilate within, just saying, you can ventilate with a window, you can ventilate, many ways you can ventilate the house, but you're not absolutely required to have an air exchanger or mechanical ventilation throughout the house. No ands or buts about it. Section N1103.6.1, whole house mechanical ventilation system. Now, if you have one and your fan FSC, this is new, what they've added to the table, and they've added an efficiency rating, FSC rating for that fan, and then taken the table and also modified that to include it. So right now you got FSC ratings on bath fans and range hoods and stuff like that. They decided now this fans on this mechanical ventilation is going to work under the same requirement. They have a very low FSC rating on it, so it's going to have to be a pretty good fan. So that is new, and then the table was amended to and added that line for it. So it's new information. Section 1104.1, this is the lighting equipment FSC. This is a mandatory thing. They've had a high FSC percentage requirement in the code for several cycles now. The last code cycle it was 75%. Now they're jumping it up to 90%. So you will be seeing even more LED lights and bulbs and stuff in the fixtures that we have now. It's going to be increased. And Table N1105.5.2, bracket 1, and that is under the air exchange rate. We're adjusting, and our amendment states in zones 1 through 8 that we can use 5 air changes per hour. Otherwise, before it was down at 3. And this amendment is here in order to keep this to coincide with some of the stuff in the mechanical code and those kind of things. So I believe under mechanicals, a couple spots, you should have had 5 air changes. Should have gone by you here a couple times already. That is Chapter 11, IRC, and Chapter 4 of the Energy Code. Questions from anyone?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chris Rose from Inspections. I have the commercial section of the Energy Code, so 1 through parts of, you said 4, I thought yours was 5, but I think it's funny because the first part of the book is commercial, second part, so it starts over once you get to the residential part, but you guys probably already knew that. The first one is on page C3, section 1011, and it's just inserting the City of Fargo into the title. Section C102 on page C3. The alternative materials design methods was never in the Energy Code, so they just included that in the Energy Code, and now it matches up with the 18 IBC. It's the same section, word for word. Section C1036 is a brand new section. It's on page C4. It's been added, requiring plans to be submitted to the building owner or agent within 90 days of the date of the receipt of the CO. The documents shall include mechanical, electrical, and control drawings that indicate all changes to size, type, and location of components, equipment, and assemblies. It's a brand new section. What we'll likely do is make a comment in the plan review, and then after that, it's between the builder and the owner.
Just as-built drawings, I mean, that's all it's asking for.
Sounds like it. Section C105 on page C5. The entire section has a sidebar. The intent is not changed. The 2015 was specific at what stages of construction the different types of inspections were to be performed. This section is less specific. However, the inspections are covered in the building code. So the required inspections are already in the IBC. And so it's not as specific in the Energy Code, but we're already covered in the building code with when we have to go to the structure. There's really only one definition that was worth mentioning, and it's the fenestration definition for both skylights and vertical fenestration, and that was on page C9. Chapter 3. Trying to catch up with myself. Page C28. The section has been reworded for clarity and now specifically says garage doors and rolling doors, where I don't think before they ever mentioned it in the code. The next two tables, table C30313 and parentheses 1 and 30313 parentheses 2 on C29. They've been reorganized, but the values for our zones stayed the same. So there's a sidebar. It looks like it's different, but our values for the zone that North Dakota is in are the same. Table, oh, that's the same one. On page C, same page. Yeah, I already mentioned that. So C33 is the next page, section 40213. This is kind of an interesting one that I think people will be happy about. They added an R value to the table for heated slabs in the footnote. So they changed the break from the inside of the building where there's a heated slab to the footing. And it used to be an R10, and now it's an R5. So where we used to allow the 45, where the slab hits the foam, we used to allow the 45 because the people in the field were having issues, several different types of issues. That was a 2-inch piece of foam, and now it's reduced to a 1. So I think people are going to be really happy about that because they really weren't doing that great of a job with the 45 anyway. And there were a lot of issues with breaking out the edge of the concrete. So they made a good change.
And we had in several instances allowed that as an alternative. 'Cause most of them would use the 2-inch white, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is 10, and that would be really crumbly, but then as long as they went down to a good thermal dense foam, we allowed it to go down to 1 anyway.
Section 40214, page C32, they reworded for clarity, the formula stayed the same. Section C402.2.2, on page C35, the above-grade walls, they reworded the requirements for mass walls, just like in HAP's section, but it's essentially the same as it was. Section C40225 on page 36. They've added the section and changed the footnote. It's footnote C, where I think, no, I didn't mention this one. Where heated slabs are below grade, the below grade walls shall comply with the U factor requirements for above grade mass walls instead of the F factor requirements for the heated slabs. I think that they changed this to recognize areas of the country where there's below grade. A lot of the areas of the country don't have below grade space. And so I think that's why they inserted that. Page 37. It looks like they reworked it a little bit, but our zone changed this, our zones stayed the same. And that was table 402.2. Excuse me, 402.4. They added a section on, I skipped a page, on page 36. Airspaces, it's section 402.2.7. It essentially says that if you have an airspace next to a conditioned space, they better not be communicating. So you got to seal off all your holes and all your penetrations. So I think, I talked to the inspectors, and they'd already been doing that inspection to make sure that the cold air wasn't getting into the insulated space. So they're already doing it, they just they caught up with what we already knew. On page C95, they have a new section that they changed I gotta catch up to C95. It's section C408, and it's maintenance information and system commissioning. They changed the first part of the section where it used to say, this section covers the provisions of the mechanical information, and now it just says maintenance, and the commissioning of the functional testing requirements for the building. So that the intent is the same, but they did change that one word. And they got a little bit more specific with the documents that are required on C97 with drawings, manuals, and a report. And it says the same thing. The construction document shall specify the documents described in this section to be provided to the building owner or owner's authorized agent within 90 days. We do mention that in plan reviews. Again, it's something between the builder and the owner. And this isn't a new section, it's been in the code. They just reworded it a little bit to include the specific types of reports and drawings that are required. And that's it for the energy section, commercial part. Any questions from the board or the audience?
So for does this address the insulation on the outside of walls, the continuous insulation? Does that change at all where we allow the ComCheck to take out the rigid insulation outside of wall?
We
Is that-
still allow the ComCheck, or you can
Okay.
use the table.
Okay. Yep.
I believe there's 3 different paths to take when you go into the energy code. You can do the prescriptive tables, you can do the ComCheck computer-generated program, or an ASHRAE 91, I think.
Has the ComCheck changed at all in this code for what's required?
I don't think any of us have downloaded it and tried it.
Okay.
I'm not even sure if a new version is available yet. I haven't checked.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah, come on up.
Hey, Andy Cooper with Cooper Commissioning. As far as section C408 for the building commissioning systems, it sounds like most of what's currently in there you guys are planning on keeping and just changing these few little sections here, correct?
Well, we don't change the sections. They're just added to be more specific to what's required within the drawings. So we don't intend on making an amendment to the existing code. The code just got more specific with what's required in the commissioning document.
Okay. So then on your paragraph here, as far as the requirements for the building operation maintenance manuals, it sounds like you're talking about the commissioning report and all that included to be due 90 days after the certificate of occupancy. Just based off of experience, by the time we get through a commissioning process, doing all the functional testing, both the first pass, and then by the time that we give that list to the contractors, they resolve issues, you go back, do follow-up verification testing, and then if there's any seasonal deferred testing, that can easily exceed that 90-day window. So, a person can give a preliminary commissioning report within that 90-day window, but to get the final report, it just, systems aren't completed and the commissioning process isn't completed, especially if it's a lead project or if we're involved throughout the 1-year warranty period. That final report doesn't get generated till the end of the warranty period.
Did you want to recommend a revision?
I would recommend a revision. You could maybe put preliminary commission report for that 90 days, and then, again, depending what scope of work the commissioning provider is brought on, if they're, throughout the warranty period or whatever, then provide that final revised report at the end of the project scope.
So,
Go ahead.
so I understand the concern with things delaying to get that 90-day window, but I also thought I understood that that's not really something that the city looks to enforce because it's between builder and owner.
Okay.
So if we change it, will it effectively change anything that's being done? Because no one has a clock that 90 days has elapsed and now we're enforcing something.
Okay.
That's my understanding of how that's working.
Yeah, it could get difficult because of the schedules, it's like Andy said, and we don't get in the middle. It's almost like if we leave it at 90 and an owner comes to us, I'm not getting my report, we would try and enforce the 90. If nobody has any issues with it, it's never going to come up.
Well, maybe what I could say is a preliminary after 90 and include something like through one heating and cooling season. So like he said, he's covered if the building gets a CO in August and they haven't used the heating system yet, you don't know if it's going to break. So maybe you could say through one heating and cooling system, and the preliminary, like you said, at the 90 days. Even
there-
though we're not going to get in the middle, it would help us if somebody did come to us and ask us for help.
Gives everyone a little more leeway on getting through all the things that need to happen.
Right.
So is there an issue with starting all systems within 90, heating, cooling, everything, and testing?
Yes, it really depends on the design of the building systems. If functional testing happens to start in the beginning of winter, we can't go and test the air-cooled chillers, the cooling plant, things like that until your outside air temperatures are sufficient to allow that equipment to run. I mean, depending on the capabilities of the building automation system and what set points you can override and, the way you can kind of trick the system to think certain variables are happening, you can get the basics done, but you can't do the full test until the outdoor conditions are viable for that.
So you used a lot of words that could go into a revision. Would you like to propose one, maybe
I
for the
would,
next
yeah.
meeting? Put the seasonal in there and the day requirements. I don't know if there's going to be two, a 90 preliminary and a final.
Yeah, I would say that would be
And the
good-
board would have something to look at, see if they agree.
I could work with Andy on
Okay.
creating an amendment and ask somebody else to present it on the 7th meeting, because I won't be here. Maybe Bruce could just
Mhm.
bring the packet forward,
Yep.
if that's okay with everyone.
Seems fair.
Yep, seems fair. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Andy, did you have anything else?
I guess the only other suggestion I had was in section C408, 3.1 for the functional testing. The current wording, I would suggest to include or approved agency along with the registered design professional, similar to what C408.2 calls for.
That term registered design professional shows up many times in the code, and that's usually a standard
Right.
that's used everywhere
Yeah,
as
but
as our go-to for any project. Even though there's many consultant engineers, and subcontractors that do work. So that's like our line to the project.
correct.
They are responsible. So even though there's others responsible, we would look for that person to get involved if required.
So Andy, what would be the effective change of those words for you? Is it limiting because it just says design professional and people can't provide that service now?
The goal, I don't think it's limiting for people to provide the service. I think it's, from my point of view, just a clarification. Right now, we still run into a lot of people that have no idea what commissioning is, part of the services, and there's a lot of, I guess, leeway as far as whether this section C408 is even requiring that commissioning be part of a project. Certain other sections within the code say, shall have, or shall include this work, or must include. And the first paragraphs in C408 does say shall provide, but I run into a lot of either building owners, design professionals, and even code officials in various cities throughout North Dakota that say that the commissioning is not a required component, or they are unclear as far as who's responsible for providing the commissioning, whether the design professional is responsible to either perform that commissioning or, specify that, or, even include that in their design documents. So my thought is that, earlier in those sections, it included the or approved agency, just to kind of keep it consistent throughout all the sections of C408 to include that or approved agency, and just kind of help provide a little more clarification to it.
I guess my suggestion, if we added words, it might be, or agency approved by registered design professional, just so there is some continuity between the project
Right,
and
but
whoever's doing that.
I guess my fear with that is then the design professional would be responsible for hiring and approving any, party doing commissioning, where normally that's hired direct to the owner in most cases.
Well, it's not specific with who the design professional, you don't have to just hire one design professional for the entire project. So on a lot of projects, you have an architect and you have a mechanical engineer. They're still both design professionals.
Right.
And there is a definition for a registered design professional where I think you would meet the definition. And I'm not against another amendment, or I'm not one way or the other. But I think you meet the definition of registered design professional in the code.
That's true. It's italicized.
Yeah.
You want to read it? See, you can agree if you fit.
An individual who is registered or licensed to practice their respective design profession as defined by the statutory requirements of the professional registration laws of the state or jurisdiction in which the project is to be constructed.
Andy, are you registered?
No. So for the way I guess I interpret that is you need to be either a registered architect or a PE in order to do that. So for commissioning, there's no requirements that you have to be a registered PE or an architect or anything like that. Myself, we're an independent third party. All we do is commissioning, so we don't do design work, we don't do architectural HVAC design, anything like that. We don't install the systems, we just test it and inspect it, so.
So we can look at a change, but we can't make any change that doesn't take out the responsibility of the architect or registered design professional for the project.
Correct.
We can't have a conflict with that. So if we had a conflict, and it's like we had an issue with what was happening, we go to them.
Right.
So we could say or approved agency, and the same thing might happen. We might go to the architect.
It says
Or-
registered or licensed. So I don't think that would necessarily mean you have to have
In the work that they're
in
doing.
the work
Yeah,
that they're doing.
yeah. So that could work. It's just there still can't be a conflict.
Right.
So I can see adding that.
Do we as a city, do we have how is it determined that a building needs to be commissioned? Do we have a dollar, Minnesota has, if it's like a Minnesota dollars or something, if the project is over a certain dollar amount, they have to have commissioning. Have we ever stated that as a city?
No.
So the question is that the commissioning is then typically done by an owner that has decided that he wants to have his building commissioned. And it would seem to me that if the owner is asking for his building to be commissioned, that, or the architect, but he's gonna suggest it to the owner and say, I think you should have this commissioned. It's all been designed supposedly by an engineer or an architect, as far as there are those professionals, but again, that owner hires a commissioning agency to make sure that everything was installed correctly, but because he's not the designer, because he's not the registered engineer that came up with the design, and he's not the contractor, I honestly don't think that, because this puts a restriction on Andy, even as a company, to have to be, what I'm hearing and what I'm reading, that they would have to have a registered professional engineer on staff. And I don't see that as a requirement for commissioning, because they're not actually installing anything or designing anything, doing any calculations. What they're doing is they're just checking to make sure that the equipment has been installed. So that doesn't read right to me, and I get it. This code is the same code that the state of Minnesota uses, and there's commissioning companies.
Not necessarily. The state of Minnesota has a lot of amendments. It's a completely different
Oh.
published book.
So we would have to look at that and see how they do it. Do you know, Andy?
It's fairly similar as far as the wording. Minnesota has a lot of the 2015 amendments in there.
Okay,
But from what I've seen and just based on conversations with various parties, the way I read the code is, as far as the requirement, they have that exception of systems under 480,000 BTU total heating capacity and 600,000 BTU total cooling capacity do not have to be commissioned. So myself, I read that as any commercial buildings that are within a jurisdiction that upholds the state building code, and this section would then, require to have commissioning included. And, the design professional is supposed to include that in their contract, bid documents, those requirements.
so then my question would go back to the codes, and it's one I've written down. When do we require a building to be designed by a registered architect and a registered mechanical, electrical, civil engineer?
We have department policy for that. It's written, it's on our website. There are 5 criteria, certain occupancies, certain values. So we have that written. We do not have it for commissioning. And commissioning came in 6 years ago to our code, so it's still rather new. When I looked at this book, there's a lot of sections that say mandatory on it, and I will say that one does not say mandatory. So I took that at face value on that section. If they wanted it, they would have said that. They said it for LED bulbs. They did not say it for commissioning. So I think, again, we're as far from East Coast, West Coast, South. We're the last ones in the West to do anything and push it on owners. So is this something we're going to demand? In Minnesota, they do it. California, they do it. We haven't done it here.
And again, I don't think they do it in Minnesota on privately owned buildings. It's only when state money is involved.
Oh,
Yeah.
federal, state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just think this is a quagmire, so if that's what you're saying, it doesn't say mandatory, we're not going to say you have to have that building commission, because I'll tell you what, if it was 600,000 or 480,000, Andy needs to hire about 20 guys. And a lot of those buildings, they're not getting designed by a mechanical engineer anyway, they're just being put together by a construction
Design build.
company,
But,
right? So this would be a real burden. I'm not saying I don't want to give Andy a whole bunch of business through code, but
So
it would be scary.
we'll look at it as the whole project, and we're going to put it on our plan reviews. It's noted. The architect's on notice. This could happen. We could hold up a CO for this issue if we want to. We see issues with the system, and our inspectors should be stopping the project at the time and requiring corrections, but maybe it was done in a way that we would say that. Oh, we want it done. Probably all federal projects, they don't come through our office anyway. State probably would. Ours was.
I think it would just be worth discussion to help you say that, either I don't know, square footage size or a dollar volume size where something like this might be mandatory, but it would also then take somebody that understands the commissioning reports then you have to review them, right? Then you have to add staff, or it just goes into the mechanical and stuff?
No, that is between the owner and the consultant.
Okay.
And if there's an architect involved, he's the go-between,
So I think this started a good conversation about commissioning as a whole, but I want to dial this back to Andy's original request, just to make sure I'm following. You specifically cited 408.3.1, correct?
Correct.
That is just commissioning of lighting controls. All of the other facets of commissioning have the wordage or the verbiage that you've requested, registered design professional or approved agency already in the code. So why is just lighting controls different?
just to keep consistency through those sections. I mean, for commissioning, usually it's the commissioning provider that does the HVAC systems and the lighting controls functional testing. The design engineer is not going to really come out and do the functional testing of those lighting controls. So I was just thinking to keep it consistent throughout the whole section.
So that was the original request, and then to your point, Dave, I don't want to, preclude you from providing the service. It's, if all of the other things, hydronic heating and HVAC and stuff, can have an approved agency, why can't lighting controls? That seems like a simpler ask than what constitutes requiring commissioning to begin with, which I still think is that might be a good thing to discuss as, let's have something in place.
You're right. I just looked back, and the other two have that.
Right, so maybe it's not as a big of a change as we thought it was, it's just simply for that section. But it is, I think it did bring up a good question, at what point does commissioning become required? And maybe that's not the conversation for here, but that is something that I think there probably needs to be some guardrails around that so people know it's elective or it's required. So do we treat that one like the previous request where you and Chris can work? I mean, that one's pretty simple on the face of it, but if that gets in front of us for the next meeting, just to take a look at.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
We can do both. I think that one we can do.
Yeah.
I don't know why they left it out on.
Yeah,
Lighting.
I don't know enough about the commissioning of lighting controls, but it seems like of the commissioning, that one's probably the most benign. HVAC systems and heating systems would be a little more robust, lighting controls a little less so. So I don't know why that one would have a different, they should be aligned in my opinion.
Right.
We had a legislator, he told me he was going to eliminate all lighting controls from the code. And it's not I looked through 400 bills and it wasn't there. But he's going to do it. And it's strange because I hadn't looked at the code. I was standing at the counter with him and he's offering something. He said, what if I put in all LED bulbs? And I remembered, I thought it was 50 or some percent. It was 75. And I said, okay, you do 100% high efficiency bulbs, I'll do it. He said, well, maybe not 100. Okay, 90. I'll think about that. And then the code, he looked at the code and the code changed to 90 on its own anyway. So, caught up to him. So I retract my offer.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thanks.
Does anybody have anything else?
Good, that was a good discussion. I like that. Do we need to make a motion to approve the new business as such? I don't think so. Okay. Okay, yep, let's do that. Let's move on to item number 4, which is staff reports. Do we have
So
any
we
reports?
chatted a little bit about that. We'll bring back the 2 structural issues when Clay and Justin are in this room at the same time, or the new room. And then,
Are you gonna include that with the packet, the things that you
Yeah.
held in, so that everyone can see that then?
yeah.
Okay.
Very good. And then Justin asked about total adoption of everything we're doing here, so I just thought I'd mention that. We're going through each issue. As the presenters present the issue, if nothing's brought up, that's how it's going in the minutes, and you're approving those minutes. So everything that has been done so far is approved. The issues that we keep bringing up, they're not approved until they get in the final minutes. So we're at the end, we're going to approve, final, all done. Nobody has any more issues. And after you do that, you're going to make a motion to send to commission all the minutes that we have and approve the codes as amended. And then I take that, I bring it to commission. So it probably happens in July or August that we bring that to commission for final adoption. And I enjoy saying to the public that the code is adopted by the board, not me.
Thanks.
And that's all I have today.
Okay, if that's everything, I think if we can acquire a motion to adjourn,
We'll make a motion to adjourn.
we second.
Second?
All right, meeting adjourned. Thanks, guys.